Good evening. Welcome to Building Better Assessments in Schoolnet. This is Pam Batchelor from North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, Digital Teaching and Learning. And with me tonight, I have my colleague, Jill Darrow.
Welcome, guys. Glad to have you all with us tonight.
And so tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about building better assessments in Schoolnet. You do have a copy of the slide deck presentation in the handout section of GoToWebinar, as well as there's a link to it that you can use to view the slide deck. Let's do a quick sound check. If you can hear me, please raise your hand in the attendee panel. There's a little hand icon. You can raise your hand if you can hear me. All right, I'm seeing some hands go up. Wonderful. I'm going to lower the hands, and if everybody could raise them back again if you can see my screen. So let's just make sure everyone can see my screen okay. And just for your information, this session is being recorded, so you will have the recording available for your review, so that way you can play back. I do appreciate you taking time out during the holiday season. I know how crazy of a week this is. There is a questions feature in the GoToWebinar panel. If at any point in time you have a question, please use the questions feature to type those in, and Jill and I will respond, or we'll go over it with the whole group depending on your question. But the question panel does keep track of who asked the question, so that way in case we need to go back and do some follow-up, we can. So please make sure you use that questions panel to ask your questions as we go. So you do have my contact information. So you have my email address as well as my Twitter. I am pretty active on Twitter, so please, if you use Twitter, please follow me. That way you'll get updates on all things Schoolnet, as well as Canvas and Go Open and See and Imagine Math. Those are the products that I represent on the home-based team for digital teaching and learning. So I'm big with Google Apps for Education, and I try to tweet out free stuff. So please make sure if you're interested, you can follow me and we can stay connected. And I also have my email address listed up there in case you need to get in touch with me. You do also have a Schoolnet lead in every public school unit. So you should have somebody that you can contact locally that knows exactly, the specific setup, because sometimes for technical issues, it is a matter of network and security and all those browser settings. And so having that local Schoolnet resource is great to have that connection of knowing who locally you can reach out to for help with Schoolnet issues. So a couple of logistics. We are here December 18th for the live webinar. GoToWebinar will track and verify your attendance tonight. Tomorrow, since it's the holiday season, I'm going to get these certificates wrapped up and sent out tomorrow. So tomorrow you will receive an email from me to the email address that you use to register for the webinar with your certificate of attendance, as well as a copy of the slide deck and a link to the recording. Your certificate will be for 0.1 CEUs, equal to 1 hour, and it will be recommended for digital learning competency credit. You must follow your local process for submitting that credit. And I know some of you, your districts may require you to submit 2 or 3 certificates at once. They won't let you do 0.1 credit. So please just make sure you follow your local policies. And also for digital learning competency credit, it's always a good idea to include an artifact or reflection of how this is digital learning competency credit. So how you're going to take the information tonight and apply it into your classroom, any Schoolnet assessments that you create as a result of this webinar. All of those are great ideas about how to use Schoolnet and get that digital learning competency credit issued. I do have one quick question before we jump into some content, and I'm just kind of curious about who's joining us in the room tonight. So if you will take a second to answer this poll. All right, give you about 3 more seconds to answer the poll. All right, and so it looks like we do have mostly classroom teachers with us tonight, as well as a handful of instructional coaches and school administrators. So thank you again for taking some time with us during this busy holiday season. We will be talking tonight about kind of the stages of assessment building and how these work in Schoolnet. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what should we be thinking about before we build an assessment. How do we search Schoolnet effectively for finding the best items or creating them? And then afterwards, scheduling that assessment and then looking at our options and some data evaluation pieces. So in thinking about our, before we give a test, an assessment, right? What learning outcomes do I need to measure? What specific standards have I been teaching with my students that I need to check their current understanding of those standards? What is the purpose of this assessment? Is it something that, is just a quick formative assessment, a few questions just to check understanding? Is it a more summative assessment or end of a unit assessment? Or is it, even something that's flexible and maybe you're giving an assessment as homework practice for students to have extra practice for online testing? So just be thinking about what are those things, what is the purpose, what's your goals of the assessment, and then finally, who is creating the test, right? So are you creating this test as just a simple classroom formative assessment? Is it a co-authored assessment where you're going to be working with other colleagues and staff members? Is it a school level test where you're going to be giving this to all of the math classes for 3rd grade math, for example? Or is it even a district benchmark where you can give this test to every course in your district? So those are just kind of some of the options within Schoolnet, and so it's nice to kind of have these questions well thought out before you even get into the platform. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to model a few of these things when looking at test specifications in particular. So there is a EOC specifications sheet that is given out by our testing and accountability department. Is anyone familiar with these specification sheets? If you are familiar with them, if you could raise your hand, we'll see if anyone has heard of these before. I see a couple of hands going up. All right, great. So these, if you happen to be in a teaching a tested subject or grade level, these specification sheets can be very handy when thinking about building an assessment in Schoolnet. So what I'm going to do is, actually this little image right here is a link, and so I just updated it with our new website. Last week, DPI launched a new website, and so I have it upgraded with the newest link, right? So this goes to our end of grade assessments page. And if you'll notice under resources, there's test specifications. And so, they're still working on the reading exams and updating those. So you won't have a reading specification sheet until early next year. But for this purpose, I'm just going to look at the 3-8 math. And that opens up a PDF. And so I can see a little bit about the purpose of the assessment, the curriculum cycle, when it was last updated, the standards, prioritization of the standards, and then the money maker for Schoolnet is really these weight distributions by domain, and then also our item by depth of knowledge, or DOK level, right? So if I go in here and let's just pretend I'm a 4th grade math teacher, and I look and I say, ooh, fractions are 30 to 34% of what my students are going to be tested on at the end of the year, at the end of grade assessment. So knowing that my students need 30 to 34% of questions are on fractions, I'm going to make sure to give them lots of fractions practice within Schoolnet, right? So then if I go down here to the EOG Math 3.8 items by depth of knowledge or DOK level, I can see that for 4th grade, 40 to 50% of my items for my students will be at a DOK 1, and then 50 to 60 will be at a DOK 2, and 5% will be at a DOK 3. So if I was thinking about building just a 10 question, just to check on how my students understand fractions, right? Then I can know that when I go into Schoolnet, Schoolnet does have depth of knowledge as one of the options when you're searching for assessment items. I could look specifically for 4th grade math, looking at fractions, and then I could look for my DOK levels and see that maybe I should put 4 questions out of that 10 question assessment at a DOK 1, and maybe 5 questions at a DOK 2, and 1 question at a DOK 3, right? So that way I have an assessment that's a little bit similar in nature to what my students are going to see at the end of the year. Any questions so far? Doesn't look like it, so.
No, not yet.
All right, so great. So I'm going to actually go over into Schoolnet and we're going to model this. So we're going to take a look at how you would build an assessment similar to one I just described. 10 questions, looking at our domains, looking at our depth of knowledge or DOK levels, right? So I'm going to use the training site because that has fictitious data. That's fine for presenting. But I encourage you, if you want to follow along with me, to use your Schoolnet site. So logging into the NC Ed Cloud and clicking on the red Schoolnet house icon. That'll take you to your live site. So that way, if you follow along with me, any work that you do will actually, be towards the end assessment that you can use. So.
We also find sometimes that it's hard to be in the site while Pam's talking. So if you want to just watch her right now, and then when you get the recording tomorrow, work along, that could be another way just to kind of see how Pam's going through Schoolnet and getting to all these items.
Absolutely. Great suggestion, Jill. So when you log into Schoolnet, if you go over to your navigation on the left side, if you don't see your navigation displayed out, you can click on the little hamburger or 3 lines in the top left corner, and you'll notice that it expands out your navigation so you can see the different sections. We're going to go under assessments, and we're going to go under items, rubrics, and passages, and we're going to click on find. When you click on find, you'll notice there's 2 options, items and passages. So everybody except for ELA is going to click on items. If you are an ELA teacher, you're going to click on passages because you're going to be looking specifically at passages more than likely for your assessments. So I'm going to click on items because we're looking at 4th grade math. And you'll notice that Schoolnet, with its recent upgrade, it has these subjects kind of already selected, right? So it goes by PowerSchool, and so it recognizes that what subjects and grade levels I have. However, sometimes when you're doing a more advanced search, like I'm going to show you, the filters can kind of get in the way with the automatic subject and grade level, right? Because especially if you're an elementary teacher, you're not going to be looking for items for every subject that you teach at one time. So coming in January, we're going to have an update of Schoolnet, and the training site that I'm modeling right here has already been updated to the newest version. So you see this little button here, it's called Clear All Filters. You do not have this right now in your live site, but you will have it on January 10th, and it's probably one of my favorite new features because it clears all your filters that you have selected. All right, so I've cleared all my filters. You could also just go under whatever it has checked and uncheck them. So I'm going to go down there, and you'll notice right here on the home page for search, this is another new feature of Schoolnet, is that it has your DOK levels right here on the initial search page. But for right now, we're just going to go in and select our standards first. I always like to select my standards first when I'm searching for items because in North Carolina, our standards already have our grade level and subject built in them. So you don't have to add grade level or subject area in your search as long as you just add a standard. And standards are always what we should have first on our mind when we're building an assessment. So always searching for your standards first pretty much takes care of the filtering of items for you. So I'm going to be going in here and selecting my subject area. And I'm going to go ahead and select my grade. And I'm looking for that wonderful fractions. All right, so notice there's a plus arrow and then there's a caret. You always want to use the caret to kind of drill down into the exact questions you want because in Schoolnet, items are aligned to the child standards. They're not aligned to the domain. Right? So fractions is the domain, and then underneath you have your specific objectives, right? The standards and then the objectives underneath, right? So here is where we're going to start to see the actual items. And you'll notice this is another new feature that's coming in January. You'll notice these numbers now. So it tells you exactly how many items are aligned to each one of these objectives. So we'll go ahead and add those. Save and close. So now I'm just looking at 149 items, right, that are aligned to these 4th grade standards. Okay. And then I'm going to go down here. And for right now, in our current live site, if you're following along with me, you'll need to go to all filters. And right here where it says webs DOK, right? Notice I was, first going through and looking for my level 1, right? And so now I've got 21 items, right? So for a 10 question assessment, I said I needed to have 4 items at a DOK 1. All right, so now I can go under item actions and I can go ahead and say add to test. All right, and I'm just going to select create a new test with these items. All right. So when you create a test in Schoolnet, you have to add some of this information. So I'm just going to create our sample. And we got to make sure our standards document matches our subject area. We're going to go through and generate our test. All right, and it's got our 4 items. And so now I need to go back and I need to add some more items for our level 2. All right. And it's going to remember those standards that I had picked before. Well, it's going to remember the grade level and subject area that I established for the test. There we go. So I go back into my fractions. And now I go back to all filters. And where my depth of knowledge now we're going to be looking at 2. And so now I have 70 items to choose from for DOK 2. All right, we've got 5 items. All right, and now I need to go back and I've got 9. sure my standards. All right, and then go to all filters and webs. So now I need a 3, and I have 21 items. So we're going to pick this one and add to the test. All right, so now we have 10 items on this test, and I have 4 of them that are at a DOK 1, 5 that are at a DOK 2, and 1 that's at a DOK 3. All right, so any questions so far?
Do not have any questions in our question bank at this time.
All right. So going back to selection, that's kind of how I wanted to show you, make sure you understand specifications. Those are very helpful if you happen to be teaching one of those test areas. But it's also just good practice too in thinking about building an assessment to make sure you have questions that are at different levels. If you are more familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, we do have our questions in Schoolnet aligned to Bloom's levels as well. And you could search by that. That was right next to the web's depth of knowledge. So you can certainly look for questions that are different things. So as I was kind of modeling during that segment about looking at items, notice in Schoolnet we have several different item banks, right? And I'm going to take a second to go over those in just a minute. We're going to go back into Schoolnet. And then I also showed you those item filters, right? Looking for rigor, right? And then we're going to look at assessments, and we're going to look at accommodations and purpose. All right, so I'm going to jump back over to that assessment I made, and let's just go in and see if we want to add another item from the item bank. I do want to show you with the all filters. You can also filter by question type. So maybe if you were looking for some gridded response questions, I know that's very popular with math. And it's also something that's a little bit difficult for students to answer online. So it's a good opportunity to give students some practice with gridded response questions online, especially if your school is going to be doing online testing at the end of the year. You definitely want to make sure students have chances to get familiar with how to take an online test, right? So I can look for specific question types. I can also go into our Bloom's levels there. And then also there's a question language, all right? Then at the top here, you'll see there's an item banks, right? So we have several different item banks in Schoolnet. This is something that's been new for this year. This was our part of our back to school release in Schoolnet, that items were actually organized into banks. So we have an older bank called the 2013-2016 Schoolnet Items Bank. These are some of the first items that came over to Schoolnet when we first started using Schoolnet. They're still good items. They're relevant. They are updated to the latest North Carolina standards. Every time standards are updated, items in Schoolnet are realigned to the latest standards. So everything that you see in Schoolnet is aligned to the most current standards. So all of the banks have items that are aligned to the most current standards. The Certica Bank, these are national items that have been aligned to North Carolina standards. Very good items. The Certica Bank is where most of our items are that have the Webb's and the Bloom's taxonomy available filters on them, right? And then we have 2 banks from NCDPI. So we have a classroom bank. These are items that are similar in nature to the EOG and EOC items, as well as NCFE items. So we do have North Carolina Final Exam items in the classroom bank. The released bank are the items from the released forms. So I know a frequent question we get is, how do I find the released items for chemistry or biology? All right, you can actually go into the release bank and search for those specific subject areas and grade levels, and you will see the released items, the most recent that we have. We do also have 2 CTE banks. So if you are a middle school CTE, we have NC-CTE middle, and then if for high school, it's NC-CTE unsecured. So we do have career and technical banks. And then if you are a administrator or leadership at the school or district level, we do have an additional bank of benchmark items. And those are restricted from classroom view. So that's why that item bank is not appearing right now for me, because I'm logged into the training site as a teacher. So I wouldn't have access to the benchmark bank, right? So depending on the type of assessment that I want to build, I can select different banks. So if I know I wanted to just give my students those released items to practice, I could just click to search just the released bank. So we'll do that, and I will apply filter. And now I just have the 40 items that are the released items for math in 4th grade. How are we doing, Jill? Do we have any questions?
Yes, Pam. When you get to it, they would like to see how they could have just English only. So if you could show them the difference in the Certica banks between the English and the Spanish bank.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to just go to the home page for a second for item banks, because that shows you the description. So something that we did last month as a result of feedback is that we've actually created a separate bank just for Spanish items. So before, the Spanish items all come from Certica, and they were mixed in with the English items from Certica. However, I'm just going to go down under assessments and go to item banks, and you will now see that there is a Certica item bank that's Spanish. So now you should not have search results that are items in Spanish unless you are searching the Certica item bank, right? That's in Spanish. So if you know that you are not going to need Spanish items, there's this little checkbox on this bank, and Schoolnet remembers your search preferences, and I would uncheck this bank, and that way you will not have to worry about seeing Spanish items. On the other hand, if you know that you need Spanish items, you can certainly just check the Spanish Certica item bank to get those Spanish items, because they are very useful to have. You can see we even have about 381 passages in Spanish with Spanish items. So that's very helpful to know that that's there, but we have it separated out now. So hopefully it's easier to find the English or Spanish items depending on what your needs are.
Thanks, Pam.
Sure. All right. So we're going to go back to our test, and I wanted to show a couple of customizations that we can work on. So to go back to our assessment, we can just go to our assessment dashboard, and that's where we'll see all the assessments that we're working on, right? So I can see there we go, under recently viewed tests. Sometimes is the easiest way just to go back into my 4th grade. All right, so a couple of things to check for. If I needed accommodations on this test, that is going to be under our test properties. And you'll notice that right here, I do not have any of my accommodations checked. So accommodations in Schoolnet are a 2-part process. When I am creating the test, I have to go in and select the accommodations that I would like to enable. And then each individual student has to have their accommodations marked on their student profile according to their IEP or 504 plan, right? So I have to enable it on my test, and then that individual student has to have it marked on their profile in order for them to receive the accommodations when they come take a test. So I've just enabled all the accommodations. Another thing that I like to do is this enable student comments. I like to allow my students to comment on each item, and I'll show you why in just a second when we preview the test. So I'm going to click on Save. All right, and you'll notice now that I have my items, and I still have the ability to go in and edit them, right? So in the editor, we do have several features that are great for personalized learning. You can add explanations to the questions and answer choices. This will allow the student to be able to see what they missed, as well as this has a full text editor. So you can actually put in links or videos. So if a student selected an incorrect answer, you could actually go in and give them a link to maybe a video that reviews the concept or the standards being assessed on in the assessment. So you could go in here and add an explanation. You can also do this for correct answers as well. So maybe if you wanted to dig a little deeper and give them an extension option, you can do that. And then when students, after they take the test, they can view their results, and they can also view these explanations. So very powerful features right in here for personalized learning or giving some additional instructions for students. Another question I get frequently is about students maybe who need 3 answer choices on the test. That's very easy to do in Schoolnet. You can just click on the little trash can next to one of the answer choices, and now this one has 3 answer choices. Down at the bottom, for each item, you can select tools and manipulatives. So if I wanted them to have a calculator on this particular question, I can do that. So a couple of notes about the questions. It is just a basic there's a few different levels of calculators. It is not the Desmos calculator. So we get that question a lot because we know that Desmos calculator is used on state testing or allowed on state testing. It is not in Schoolnet. However, if you'll notice, up here with the question bar, when I go into my question bar, I have a full text editor. Desmos, right here with this little source code, that's actually HTML. Desmos allows you to embed their calculator. So we do have folks that will go into each question and just copy and paste that embed code for a Desmos calculator, and then they have the Desmos calculator embedded on the test, and it does show up correctly in TestNav. So that is a workaround. If you would like to embed a Desmos calculator into your items for Schoolnet, you can do that. So another question I get frequently is notice that there's alternate text, right? And so this is where I can actually go in and adjust what is spoken. So especially if you create your own math questions and then you have students who need to read aloud, it can be very difficult for a screen reader to read a math question out correctly. So there's these 2 little thought bubbles that say alternate text. If you click on them, you can type in exactly what you want the screen reader to say. So that way you make sure all of your math equations are read correctly. The other thing about that is to always use the equation editor, which is this little insert equation. because that will, the screen reader will read the math equation correctly as long as you use the screen editor. If I just said 2 plus 4, and I just said that, you know, in a normal editor without using the equation editor, it might incorrectly read it when I go back. So always using the equation editor is a good chance. All right, so I'm going to save my test details. And notice that one of my tests, one of my questions, oh, it was fine. It had a little yellow line, but when I clicked on it, it was fine. So save changes. And one thing that's always very important to do is to generate that text-to-speech. It'll generate automatically when you publish your test, when you schedule it. But I'm just going to go ahead and generate now because I want to go ahead and preview the test as a student. It's always a good idea to preview your test just to make sure all of the questions appear correctly. And it also allows you to kind of go through, make sure you got a calculator or any other manipulatives that you have. And it also just, you know, is a good check before you get the test. And while this is spinning right now and it's being generated, are there any questions?
Not yet. We don't have any more questions.
Awesome. All right, so after we preview the test, we're gonna go into some of these scheduling options, and I'm gonna show you some of the things that I really like in Schoolnet for as far as addressing accessibility, security, and delivery features. And then I'm gonna show you the Proctor dashboard, and we're gonna look at some reporting. All right. So your next steps, once you've created a test, is to go through the scheduling steps. So we have our stages at the top of the screen. We go from private draft to ready to schedule, and then we're going to say scheduled. So we have to go through some start dates, right? So when's the first day? We want students to be able to take this test. When's the last date? And I always give yourself some extra time because you might have a student that's absent. You will also have a third checkbox right here under test settings that says share grades with PowerTeacher Pro. So if you would like this test, the scores from this test to automatically go into your PowerTeacher Pro gradebook, you would check the third box that I don't have because I'm in the test site and it's not hooked up to a gradebook. But once you check that box, it will ask you what category you would like your assessment to go into in your gradebook. So out of the gradebook categories that you have set up, it will ask you what you want to count this test as. All right. On their online test delivery, if you're having your students take this test online, you can require a secure tester application. Please note that is a separate download that must be installed on every device used for testing. So do not check this box unless you are sure that all the devices that you are going to use, or your students are going to use to take assessments, have that secure tester downloaded and installed on them. I know when I was in the classroom, we had like a local policy in place where I couldn't download any applications. I had to go through technology services in my district to get them to install things. So please make sure you do not require a secure tester unless you know for sure that has been done for you. There is a passcode that is randomly generated. please change that to something that your students will remember. You can show student scores, display the test. One of my favorite ones is this enforced test time. So we get a lot of questions about security, especially from our high school, middle school folks. If you do this enforced test time, then you can actually change it to your block. So with my block 1 is from 9 to 10 a.m. and I know we're going to give this test on a Tuesday. I can lock it down. So now this test is only available from 9 to 10 a.m. on Tuesdays. And then I can make a copy for my next block. So make a copy of the test and change the test time to another block. All right, time test. So if you want to give it a test a certain amount of time, my very favorite option is this track and display student response times. This will give me a per question response time for my students, right? And it'll display an item analysis. So that way I can know exactly how long each student took for each question on my assessment. And that's also available to the student as well as to parents when they go in and look at their item analysis that they can report, that they can see for each test. They will actually be able to see the student response time. Very powerful information for a parent conference. If you have a student that maybe, especially if it was a reading assessment or something, very complex, and, they only took a few seconds on each question, then that's a powerful statement right there for you. Also on the other side, thinking about students who may have test anxiety, being able to see exactly where they kind of gave up on the test. If they took a couple of minutes per question and then the last 5 questions, they just answered them in like less than 5 seconds. All right. Very powerful information, and that's track and display student response times. Excuse me. Scramble question order, scramble answer choices. 2 very good security features. Make sure you do not do scramble question order on a test with passages because it will separate the questions from the passage. All right. The very last thing you have to do, always, always, always make sure you edit the assignment and assign a test to your students. This is very important for reporting as well as for the grade book. So your test should be given to your students only. Do not create a test and say, oh, here's the test I created, and share the passcode with another teacher, because you will end up with extra students and extra student scores on your reporting, and they will not have their student scores. They will not be able to see what their students made on the test. What we can do is use co-authoring to share a test with our colleagues. All right, so I'm going to click on Save and Publish, and I believe that answers one of the questions, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that in just a second. So this test has been published. All right, if I go down here to where it says test properties, I can actually go over here under assessments, and there's a little box that says co-authoring, right? So let's say I wanted to make sure I shared a test with my science teachers. I'm a science teacher. I want to make sure I go under there. If we go under assessments and go under test co-authoring, if you have a group that you're going to be working with all year, I highly recommend you create a folder. And if you just go under that create new button and say folder, and we're just going to call this science folder. And then to add users, you search by their name, and you have to search last name, comma, first name, right? So I'm going to go through and I'm going to search last name comma, first name. This is statewide. So you can co-author with students across, or excuse me, not students, teachers across the state. So if you happen to have a colleague who has a common last name like Smith, you can expect it to take a second or, several seconds to go ahead and you can expect it to take up to maybe a minute or so to go ahead and load. I'm on the training site, and so on the training site, you do not have as many teachers loaded because it's not connected to our real database, but you would just go through the process of adding each teacher one by one to this folder. And then when I click on save, when I create a new test, I can actually go ahead and put it in that co-authoring folder. So if we go down under co-authoring, I can now enable co-authoring for my test, and I can save it to a folder, and there's that science folder I just made. So now all of my colleagues will automatically have access to this test because I'm saving it right to my co-authored folder. Important note, tests that are in your co-authored folder are kind of like your master copy. Everyone needs to make sure they make a copy of the test and schedule it for their individual students out of the co-authoring folder. So you never actually use the test that's in your co-authoring folder. You always click on make a copy and schedule that copy. And each teacher needs to schedule their own copy, so that way you can set dates and then also the gradebook settings that you want for your specific test. All right, so we're going to go back, and hopefully that test is published, so that way we can look at it. Because I did want to show you kind of some of the accommodations and things. All right, it does look like it's ready. All right, so I'm going to preview the test now. And so this is exactly what it looks like as a student, except they do not have that calculate score, right? So calculate score, that's just something for you as a teacher if you wanted to kind of generate what the answer choice is, right? Notice over here on the right side, I have the text to speech.
Which equation shows the sum of? Which equation shows this?
All right, so I can start and stop that. I also have up here, since I enabled a calculator for this particular assessment, I can see the built-in calculator that Schoolnet has. I can use the crossout tool, right? These are very good things for our students. And then notice there's also this little speech bubble, right? So this is the comment feature. So remember I enabled that back in the test settings. I told you why, all right? So that lets the teacher know about this particular question. And in my classroom, when I did use Schoolnet for pre-assessments or pre-tests, I would always have the students type in if they guessed. Because a lot of times the pre-assessment is a short assessment, and you might only have 1 or 2 questions per standard on a pre-assessment. So if a student was a lucky guesser, then they really don't have that knowledge of that standard, but their pre-test to me might tell me that they have that knowledge of the standard. So enabling the student comments feature and kind of training my students to say when they guessed on a question was very helpful to me, because now I knew, especially if I'm on a pre-test, if a student really had the genuine understanding of that concept or if it was just a lucky guess. So this is exactly how it's going to look for a student. They can go through and review questions. They can also bookmark questions, and that way it will prompt them to go back and review those questions before the end of the assessment. So it's always just a good idea to go through your test and make sure all the items appear correctly, and they do. So you can just close it. If you did need to print a student test booklet, you can. So if you were going to give a copy of this test on paper, you can. But there's this option right here that says track accommodations. So since I have accommodations enabled on this test, this is a very helpful thing because it will give me my students and it will say accommodations provided, right? And it will kind of track what their usage is. So let's say a student has read aloud upon request. Well, this will tell me if they're using Net Read Aloud function on Schoolnet because it will show up. And if they never click on the play button, then it will say that it will be blank. So it'll tell me that they haven't used that accommodation, which is helpful information to have, right? So that tracked accommodations feature is very nice. And then if you also have the Proctor dashboard. So one last thing I'm pointing out here. The Proctor dashboard is great if you happen to have a cart of Chromebooks or you have students at computer lab and they're taking the assessments all at the same time. This will tell me who has taken the test and what their progress is, right? And it will show up on this test progress bar in red and green how they are doing. And you'll notice that it's refreshing. I think it refreshes every minute, but you can also refresh it by clicking on the refresh now, and it'll tell me when they're complete. So very helpful to know as you're walking around the room when students are taking a test, how they're doing, which students are, you know, how they're green and red is a really helpful just visual check. And then if there's gray in the red and green, like it's maybe red and green, then gray, then green. Gray just means that the question was either was skipped, right? So they didn't answer that question. All right, let me go back over to my presentation. And I did want to go ahead and go over, I know we're short on time. We do have a Schoolnet resources site that I've linked on the slide deck, and that has a webinar archive. So you will be able to see all of the Schoolnet webinars for the year. They are available here for you to go back and review. So if you want to learn more about Schoolnet over your holiday break, you can certainly do that. As well as there's some helpful documents to learn more about Schoolnet. And our webinar calendar is also here as well. So you can see that we have in January, we have some school and district benchmark panels that I'm putting together. I'm very excited about those. And then we're going to talk about creating and managing item banks in February, and then kind of how do I find X, Y, and Z in Schoolnet, and then diving into data, and then creating technology enhanced items. So very excited. Let me check one more time for questions.
I think we're good, Pam.
All right, I'll give everyone just another second. Now let me put my contact information back up there. And this webinar is being recorded. So, you know, you will have that recording tomorrow. I will. And as well as an email from me with your CEO certificate and a copy of the slide deck.
Pam, we do have one question about asking about our new website. Claudia, just want to confirm. Are you talking about our new DPI website? If you are, that website is up and running. And then Pam does have our Schoolnet Google site that's up and running also.
Yeah, so the new DPI website went live last week. So if you have any links to the old website, you might want to double check them for DPI because some of the links have changed with the update to the new website. All right, well, thank you.
He was asking about the new website for Schoolnet. And I'm thinking she might be talking about the update. So the actual website the web address will stay the same, but in January, there will be an update.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not the website, it's actually Schoolnet itself has an update coming in January, and it's January 10th, that weekend. And so it will be like kind of like a maintenance weekend just for Schoolnet, not for PowerSchool, just for Schoolnet. And so it'll be upgraded over the weekend, but it won't, the links to it won't change, and the website won't change itself or how you access it, just the actual applications getting updated. All right. Well, thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a happy and safe and restful holiday. Hope you get a chance to recharge, and again, thank you so much for spending part of your time with me, and thank you, Jill, for helping out with questions.
Oh, thank you, Pam.
All right, have a great night.